All right, welcome to Failure TV. I'm happy to have you all back. Today on the show, I have George Brown. He is a now retired former private independent contractor, former NATO employee, former employee of Government of Canada. He has done quite a bit in the government field, and I'm very happy to have him on the show. How are you doing, George?
Very nice, Craig. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate this.
No problem. Thank you very much for coming on. Quite the time difference here. You're over in Belgium. What time is it over there? It's 10 a.m. here.
It's now 7 o'clock Central European time.
All right.
7 p.m.
Most of us are just getting started, and you're just getting ready for the end of the day here. It's usually the way it goes, isn't it? So why don't you tell us a little bit about your history working for NATO and the Government of Canada and what you were doing there?
Well, I started off a long time ago. I'm a lot older than I look. I'm now in my 70s, but yeah, I had an very interesting career, and a lot of opportunities along the way, a lot of chances for failure, a lot of recoveries.
Yeah,
and I mean, go right back to the very beginning. I guess my first big challenge was to survive. You may not have known this, but I was born a twin. I had a twin brother. I survived. He didn't. He was stillborn. Later on, my mother had another set of twin sisters. So that too was a challenge.
I bet.
But I was a sick puppy in the beginning. I had serious asthma. I grew up awkward. I couldn't run. I couldn't catch a ball. I was uncoordinated. But you know, these sorts of disadvantages lead you to adapt, to find alternatives, to most of all to improve, and I did. I grew in my teenage years. I grew out of my asthma into hay fever, but asthma, it's a lot better than asthma, I'll tell you. All through my early childhood, not being able to keep up with the other kids, it just destroys your self-confidence. But I found that if you adapt, you find alternatives, life gets a whole lot better, and you can recover that. I became a member of the YMCA, and swimming was my thing. You go in the water. I mean, I could keep up with the other kids in the water because they couldn't swim either. And so we were on a level playing field. And so I got into competitive swimming and water polo. Later on, I had joined the Navy. I'd been in the Sea Cadets, and I joined the Navy, and they sent me off to Royal Roads, the military college on the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a challenge. I found the academic program was very difficult, and the sports program was also challenging. But I was growing out of my asthma, and I was able to face what we did on the first day when we arrived. We started into cross-country training. Every day we ran 5 miles.
Oh, wow.
And it was competitive. And I wasn't the best, but at least I was in the top 15% or so within a few days running these 5 miles every day. So you do have a chance to overcome they're not disabilities, but disadvantages you have in childhood. You can grow out of them. And because of the swimming and water polo that I had got into as a teenager, I was then on the college swim team, the college water polo team. I set 2 swimming records in the college, one at Royal Roads and one at the Royal Military College in Ontario. You know, so every dark cloud gives you an opportunity. The sun can shine again.
Yeah. Well, when you were in Royal Roads, like looking back on, the issues that you had growing up and the things that you did overcome, did you ever think that you were going to be where you ended up at the college going for that kind of stuff?
I never even thought about it. I just loved the Navy, and I wanted to be in the Navy. I wanted to be a naval officer, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
What was the draw for you? Like, what made you want to be part of the Navy versus like the Air Force or Army?
Well, when we were young, we heard all these war stories, of how the Canadian Navy grew in World War II to be the third largest Navy in the world, and then you see all these movies, all this hero stuff, and it had a charm that I wanted to be involved in. And not everyone did. A lot of people arrived at the military college with no military background whatsoever. And a lot of them, they left voluntarily by Christmas. First 6 weeks, you couldn't leave. It was part of the program. You were locked in, and you could not leave. But after 6 weeks, okay, anyone wants to leave, get out of the program, can go. And people did. We had a further dropout at Christmas after the Christmas exams. As I say, the academic program was tough. And it was a complete college education. And everyone was required to do everything. And not everyone was cut out for it. So we had a lot of failures. When we arrived the first day, they lined us up and said, okay, the 200 of you, look to your left, look to your right. One of you is not going to be here at the end of the year. And that was true. We lost half of our recruit intake in the first year. They were gone. They'd never finished. They went off to civilian university to finish their degree, and that was the end of it.
Yeah. What do you think it is between or what do you think possibly could it be between the military type school and a regular type school that didn't really appeal to them, that made them decide to leave, or that they couldn't handle it and decided to move out? Do you think it was with the actual education, or do you think it was more a personal thing on their side?
Well, most of them had been selected, that could handle the academics. I think what they weren't prepared for was the discipline. They weren't prepared for regulated 24 hours a day. You had this sports program, which everyone did everything. You had the academic program, where at least in the first 2 years, everyone did everything. Then you branched off in your third and fourth year. You had the military program as well. You had summer training with your own element, whether you were Army, Navy, or Air Force. You went off to the Navy, as we did. I don't know if I mentioned it. At the end of the first year, we went off to 4th Escort Training Squadron, 4th Escort Squadron, in Victoria, and it was demanding. On our ship was particularly demanding, and everyone on our ship, just about everyone, wanted to leave the Navy at the end of the summer training. They were fed up with it, but they didn't. They hung in. They stayed with it. The occasional person dropped out, but yeah. Most people overcame their whatever may be holding them back.
Yeah, and I really do think, well, from the people that I know that have had military careers, definitely don't know anybody that has the career like yours, but I've heard a lot of things from different people about going to like military schools, and like you had said, the discipline was one of the things that a lot of people couldn't really handle, but I think it also gave you a lot of additional benefits that a lot of people don't get in a regular lifestyle. You don't generally get that kind of discipline and understanding of how things work and building those teams that can really help you go forward, even if you're not in military going forward. I had done Army cadets back when I was younger. I think I was from 14 to 17. I think I was in Army Cadets, and that was one thing that I definitely learned from that. Was definitely got the discipline out of it, but the team building as well was something that, because I was more of a geek in school, I didn't have a lot of friends, so I was always more of the loner, so always working alone. But going into the cadets really helped me build up that team spirit and understanding how to work better with people. Would you say that your time, especially during that summer camp, even though everyone wanted to leave, do you think they were still having a half decent good time, bonding with everyone?
Our ship was just a particularly bad one. In that respect, the personnel, the training officer was a bit funny, in my viewpoint anyway. Other ships had a lot of fun, and we had 7 ships in the squadron, and we were spread out among the different ships, in with the rest of the crew. And as a cadet, as a midshipman going on these ships, you are the lowest form of sea life. You're lower than I can't say it right, an amoeba. you're the bottom of the heap. And so we they said, if you're going to be an officer, you have to learn how to scrub the deck, you have to learn how to paint, you have to learn how to chip, you have to do all the dirty work too, or else you're not going to be able to be a good officer unless you've done it all.
I agree with
that part of it. We hung in. It was just our particular ship was one that had a bad reputation among the cadets anyway.
Right.
Anyway,
now you brought up a really good point there about if you want to be a good officer, you have to do all this and you have to know this and this. Do you think that once people achieve those goals and become those officers or become a CEO or become those top level things, they start to kind of forget where they came from, forget about those low level jobs, and start making decisions that, if they were more in person there, they could get a better sense of what's happening and what should be done?
Who knows? I think every person is different. I know. In particular, there was one person I knew that he joined the Navy as an ordinary seaman, ended up an admiral. It's very, very rare to see one go all the way to the top from their very lowest ranks. And a lot of people drop out along the way. In my career, I only spent 23 years in the Navy, and because I was an engineer, I was not in the operations end, and the operations people are the ones that go up to the top. After 23 years, I said, no, this is good. I think I'll find another career now, and I joined the public service. Still working for the Navy, but as a civilian engineer.
All right.
But one of the reasons I did not go operations was that wasn't my thing. I was not good at it.
Yeah.
I remember as a junior officer, everybody has to be a watchkeeper. Everyone has to do their bridge watchkeeping time, do all the drills, know everything, make snap decisions, and be correct. I wasn't good at that. I'm more of a process person. I like to plan everything out. And by the time I had reached a decision, it was too late. The emergency was long gone.
Yeah,
I chose to go into the technical branch, into engineering, and it was the best thing I could have done because that was where I belonged.
Yeah.
And after 20 years in the Navy, they said, "Okay, you can retire if you want. We're not gonna hold you back." And I continued to work for the Navy as a civilian, and it was great.
That's
After
awesome.
Another 15 years with the public service, one of my jobs was to go over to Brussels and represent Canada on a steering committee for a project that tested ship systems, ships' electronic systems.
Okay.
And I found out that the project manager of that project was retiring. He was a Norwegian. And he said, George, you might be interested in this job. I applied for it. And I won the job. I was very lucky. Of course, I worked hard. I studied everything I could find about that work. And I won the job. But in NATO, they have a process where they have an establishment committee, which is political. And they actually said, I find out later, that there are too many Canadians winning jobs here. We have this other person who's also a qualified candidate, and these, I won't mention the country, but there's not enough representation from the Southern European nations. They don't want to leave their nice climate and come up to rainy, cold Brussels. And so they're underrepresented. And they said, okay, we'll give the job to the other qualified candidate. And so I did not get the job. That's a failure? Not really.
No.
But it was a tremendous disappointment.
Yes, but many people would consider that a failure.
I had one.
Yeah.
So what I did was another job came up. The senior engineer in that office was also retiring the year after. I applied again. And I was very lucky. I won that job too. And this time they put me in the job. But meanwhile, the project manager from this Southern European country said, well, I think I'd rather be back in my villa on the seaside, enjoying life, than being up here away from my family. His family didn't come up to Brussels. So after 5 months, he left. And so now debate, what are we going to do? Have another competition? That's not a good idea. They wanted to do that, but the chairman of the steering committee convinced them that you should take the other candidate, whoever he may be. And they said, well, if all the nations agree in writing, then we can do it. Unbelievable. All the nations agreed in writing, and I got the job.
So you got the job, then you didn't get the job, but then you got the job. That's
right. I got the job, lost the job, and then I got it back again. I think the luckiest break I've ever had, because I thoroughly enjoyed it's one of the best jobs, probably the best job I ever had, except maybe for retirement. My work in Ottawa was also extremely, extremely rewarding. I loved work. I was working there in a thing they call electronic warfare. And I was working with the scientists at the Defense Research Lab in Ottawa, whose specialty was electronic warfare. And it was so much fun. We were dealing with the US and the Australians and the UK on collaborative research and development projects, which would just blow your mind. I mean, it opened my eyes to things I had never, ever dreamed could happen. Of course, we're going back 30, 40 years. All this stuff is commonplace now. But the things that they did were so interesting. And I really enjoyed that work. And I really enjoyed coming here to Brussels, and that's where I am now. Even though I'm retired, I've stayed here. I came here, and it's a different sort of job. I had a staff of 4 people, and we ran the project with 4 people. Now, we had test ranges. I had a test range in Norway, but the Norwegian Navy ran that for me. I had a test range in Greece. The Greek Navy ran that for me. And I had a test range in the Bahamas, and the US Navy ran that for me. It was wonderful to have these really extremely highly qualified people all working together, and we improved as we went along. In the 10 years that I was there, we made a lot of very, very positive changes. And I brought in new systems. Of course, these systems are now out of date and they're being replaced, but
that's the way with technology.
It was a great thing to really be in the middle. I had really, now I didn't have a boss. I had every country was my boss. The steering committee was my boss, and representatives from each country got together twice a year and told me what to do. And that worked out very well. In my view,
it's a little different from how most people do it, for sure. Here's a question for you though. Like when you're dealing with your own team and then multiple other teams, and you're working on all this collaboration, what happens when something doesn't go right? Like you're doing all this planning, you're getting ready for a test, and it just does not work at all. Like this was the expectation, this was the reality. So what would happen when something like that happens? Like what kind of steps would you guys take to look at, who has to do what and what needs to be done to try and redo things to get to the success point?
There are so many things that can go wrong. No kidding. We had a boy. We used a boy to judge a ship's position. You had to have a reference point, and this boy, depending on which way the sea was running, the boy would be on a long lead down to an anchor on the bottom, and it would move. So you wouldn't have an exact position, you would have an approximate position. So we came up with an idea, great idea, to have a 3-point moor, which kept it absolutely in the right position. Trouble is, this was off the island of Crete in the Mediterranean. The seas in the winter there are just very, very, very rough. And the boy one day disappeared. It was gone. We thought some fisherman had come along and cut it loose. So we put another one down, or we had another one put down. And the next winter, it disappeared. You just couldn't deal with the strength of the sea in that area. It will pull a boy off the bottom.
Wow.
It was a 3-point moor. So it was back to the old method of dealing with it that had worked in the past. Every problem that we ran into had a solution. Some were not solved quickly, some took some time.
Absolutely. Well, every problem has a solution. I think it's trying to get people to that solution without having them bail on it first. One of my favorite failure quotes was from Winston Churchill, actually, when it's success is stumbling from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. And I really like that because I've had a number of people ask how I keep just doing things. Like I've tried and gone past so many things in my life. Many people will call them failures. I call them learning points. But going from one to the other and just being like, whatever, yeah, that didn't work out, but what can I...
These are learning experiences.
Yeah. What can I take from that to put into what I'm doing next? So that wasn't a complete failure. It just might be, I may have even lost interest in where it was going, but I can still take that information and take it to the next place. And that's one of the big things that I kind of see on the military side of things is, especially with so many awesome team members, you kind of just get together and come up with a solution to the problem at hand, whether it works or you have to revert back. Out of curiosity, did you ever hear from those two buoys again? Like, did anybody ever be like, hey, look at what we found?
Never, ever. Well, I mean, it's been close to 20 years now. Who knows? But in my time, they were never seen again. And we dismissed the point that of fishermen coming along and cutting them again when we saw the strength of the sea and the damage it could do to other things in the area. We lost antennas from lightning strikes. All sorts of things that could go wrong went wrong, and we had extremely capable people, that super problem solvers, and that's we had problems. We had people that solved the problems.
Now,
and
was there any kind of
very lucky there?
Yeah, was there any kind of internal thing where there is no answer, like with some jobs I've had, like when you run into a thing, they'll be like, okay, well, let's see if we can find a solution for it. But in other areas, they're like, that there's always a solution, rather than let's look for the solution. There is a solution. Let's just find it. Do you think the military has more of a kind of gear towards that? Like, we have the smartest people. Let's make this happen.
Well, we kept putting out new things. And when you put out a new thing, a new type of test, we tested the accuracy, basically, of ship systems. And when you test a new piece of kit, you run into problems. And some of those get solved and some of them don't. That's just the way it is. And some you just stumble on for years without a good solution. But I'm getting away from the fact that I was here in Brussels, and now I'm one step removed from the hands-on technical work that the guys on the ranges were doing. My job was really to manage the project and to keep. We had 8 member nations and other nations as well that were customers of our project. I had to keep them happy. Every nation was contributing funds to keep the project running, so they could come and test their ships at any of our 3 ranges. And if they weren't happy, they'd leave the project. And so they had to be knowing what was going on. They had to be happy that they were getting value for what was being spent.
Now, did you ever run into any big issues with multiple areas?
Biggest issue we ever had was the UK. UK suddenly decided, we're spending too much money. We got to cut back the defense budget, and your project, FORACS, is on the chopping block. We're not going to be part of this project anymore. And the UK had decided to leave. Talk about a scramble. We need every one of our nations, because if one leaves, the cost everyone else goes up.
Yeah.
And we got a 4-star admiral involved, Sacklant, in Norfolk, Virginia, actually got into it. He happened to be a British admiral, which was helpful.
Yes.
And he said, you guys don't know what you're losing. This is what you're losing. And, get back on the ball, redraw what you're going to cut and what you're not going to cut, because you're not going to cut this. Of course, we had some good people in Sacklant in Virginia that helped him draft in fact, wrote the letter for him, what he was going to tell the British government. And they turned around and said, yeah, okay, maybe you're right. They listen to 4-star people, don't they? Much more than they listen to us.
Yeah.
Now, as
you could have said the exact same thing, and they could have ignored you completely. You probably did.
Well, they wouldn't have had. That would have been the failure. The fact is, we managed to keep the UK in the project. A few years later, there was a British ship testing their systems on our range in Greece, and then went over into the Persian Gulf. And their ship had a boat's crew that was captured by the Iranians and locked up. They said, "You're in Iranian waters." And the ship said, "No, we're not. We know where we are. We have good systems. Besides, they've just been tested. Here's the test results that they had just done at our range." In fact, they were able to prove where they were from our test results. That was something that wouldn't have happened if the UK had dropped out of the project. We were very, very lucky they didn't drop out, but so were they. It was hate to use those win-win words, but that was one of those situations.
Absolutely.
No, we've had a lot of really real close calls, and we've been lucky all along. Everything has worked out in the end. We've solved problems collectively. It's not me solving problems. We all work together, and we had a great team. We had a wonderful team.
Yeah.
In my office, I had a Greek IT person. I had a senior engineer who was a U.S. person, myself, and I had a German principal assistant, and just the four of us. We answered to the steering committee, and let the ranges do the work.
Yeah.
And well, here's the ranges mostly solved their own problems. We just helped them.
Help guide their directions. I like that you brought up that everybody was from different areas, especially in technology these days. I know one of the big things that people are trying to do is pushing to have people from different industries work together. I'd be interested to find out what was your experience working with people from different cultures. Do you think having those different cultures from people from different areas helped helped you all better understand not only working together, but working with other groups? And do you think that was a big benefit for you?
Absolutely. Without a question of these other nations add so much. They have different cultures. Yes. Sometimes there's communication problems. We worked in English. Everyone worked in English in our project. Although NATO has two official languages, English and French, everyone in our project worked in English because the Norwegian range worked in English, the Greek range worked in English, and obviously the US range worked in English as well, or pretty close to English. Can't help a few digs there. I guess written communication required sometimes you had to carefully read things, carefully write things, so you didn't put things across in the wrong way.
Well, especially when you're dealing with things like
you had to listen in meetings, and you had to be very clear as well. And sometimes meetings were hard to understand. But no, the different nations add so much breadth and depth to any meeting.
Absolutely. I'd love to sit in on a couple of meetings, like more of those high level meetings with like all the different nations to hear them talk about those like different things. Like when somebody brings something up that needs to be discussed, how it's going to affect all the different nations, because most people think very one-dimensionally. I find, especially in North America, they're very here, what's happening here, this is how it's going to affect us, but very rarely do we ever look outside our small little bubble to see how is this going to affect others. And I love the fact that it was very collaborative and people worked to solve those issues together rather than, this is us, you do your thing.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that. Do you think that, I know with military-based stuff anyway, people will see things as, well, there's still successes and failures, I think, but do you think that the military's view on failure, because you see in the movies and stuff that there's no for an answer, and we can do this, and we won't take no for an answer. Do you think the military perspective on we can't fail, there's no failure, do you think that helps push everything forward and get to those goals, as opposed to we can, just basically thinking, well, we can do this, let's try it?
Well, quite often, more than that, you find people that just dig their heels in and say, no, we're not going to do that. And of course, when that person is from another country and is not reporting directly to you, you can't say you must do it. You've got to show them why they should do it. And sometimes you find an alternative. If someone's blocking the road, you find an alternative. Quite often, countries don't agree. Quite often, people in meetings, they never shout. They're very nice people, but they don't agree. I remember the first steering committee meeting I went to when I was representing Canada. I thought the chairman was just a master at helping people come to a solution. People would just they're almost getting angry, and they cut back and forth. You don't understand, kind of thing. Gentlemen, it's time for a coffee break. Everyone goes off, has a coffee, chats among themselves. You come back 15 minutes later, you have a solution. Everyone's, oh, we understand now. We had a chance to talk to each other. It's amazing how that happens so many times.
I've seen that happen quite a bit in meetings, and there's nobody to chair it to kind of say, let's go this way or that way. But definitely something that I have always tried to do is if somebody isn't understanding what I'm trying to put across, like, these are the reasons why we should do this, but if they don't think that it's still a good reason, I will go back and try and figure out a better way to present that information to get them to understand. Because I found in my technical experience anyway, that most of the issues with stuff that I've presented was an understanding issue of understanding the underlying reasons. Like, here's what we're presenting, and that's pretty much all they're seeing at that point. But, shedding the light on all this darkness over here and saying, this is why we need to get to this point. I find that people tend to come together a little bit more once they have a better understanding. And then you get less of you don't understand back and forth. But it would be nice to have somebody moderating that.
Oh yeah, we always had a chairman, and a good chairman makes a good meeting.
Absolutely.
Everyone else, a lot of people contribute. Some people, if they're not that good in English, are not understanding everything. So it has to be very clear. And sometimes during these breaks, a lot of the misunderstanding gets sorted out.
Absolutely. Now, here's what I think is a great question for you. Out of everything that you've done, obviously you've had some great successes. What do you think would be one of the greatest successes that you've had that could have become a failure if you hadn't have been working together, or somebody hadn't have found a better way to do things or a new way to do things?
Yeah, well, I think just winning the job in NATO, to me, it was very, very competitive. It was some great people. I was very lucky to be chosen. But when I lost that job, the fact is I was discouraged, and I was advised not to apply for another job. I was told by several people, you'll never get a job over there. And I applied anyway, and I was lucky the second time. It helped a lot that I had been attending those meetings and knew what they were talking about. I wasn't coming in blind. That gave me a tremendous advantage. over somebody that hadn't been involved with the project and probably was twice as capable as me. But another person who was involved with the project, very, very, very capable person, decided, no, I'm not going to apply after all. I'm going to drop out. He would have won. He would have easily won. He didn't, because he wasn't there.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people can relate to that, especially going for a position that they really wanted and not getting it, not necessarily ending up in the same position where they did end up getting it in the long run, though some would. But I think you've definitely resonated with people on that topic of, you know, you really want that, you don't get it, but there's that whole, you know, it's not a failure, but some people would still perceive it as a failure. I failed, I didn't get the job. And then, like you said, it's very discouraging. And then they don't want to try again or don't want to apply for other positions or stuff like that. And I think a lot of people, especially upper management, don't necessarily see that, where, you know, people on the lower level see that, and it makes them drive harder to be like, no, I'm not going to be like that. I'm not going to sit and wallow in it. I'm going to go for this again. And, make that achievement.
Well, you can approach any failure by quitting. That then it is really a failure, I think. You can also approach a failure by adapting, learning, or changing your strategy, or going around the problem. There are many ways to deal with a failure. But they're not a failure unless you make them your own failure. Yeah.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And that leads me perfectly into my final question. If you could give one piece of advice to somebody that is struggling to overcome a fear of failure or overcome some kind of roadblock, what kind of advice would you give them?
I would say, if you're not willing to fail, take the easier path. Find an easier way, and don't set yourself up with something that you have to accomplish. There's always an easier, softer way that you can take, and you may fail some other way, but if you're not willing to take a risk, then find that easy route.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think you hit the nail right on the head with that.
It's exciting. It's exciting to take the risk, isn't it?
It really is.
Look at what you're doing. You're taking a risk. Wonderful.
And that's something people have said to me. They're like, "How do you?"
I really think you're doing a wonderful job.
Thank you. And honestly, every time I do it, I'm a little terrified still to go live and to be doing this. But the feeling afterwards, once you've actually done it, so greatly outweighs the fear that I had before, that it makes it worth it, and it makes me want to do more. So it's like I said, you hit the nail on the head there. That just do it. Find the easier route if you can. That if you can't go this route, find the way that makes it easy for you. I love that. So again, thank you so very much for coming on the show today. I've had a pleasure discussing things with you. You've had some amazing stories, and I think people are going to love it.
Okay, well, thank you, Craig. Appreciate you having me.
Excellent. And thank you for everybody watching and listening today. We'll have another episode for you next month. We'll talk to you soon.